Perspective, or what's your goal regards to love and support for an entrepreneur?
We're trying to meaningfully impact the world in ways that enrich ourselves and our loved ones as well as other people. So loving and belonging and feeling like other people will support us is absolutely crucial to anyone being able to thrive within a business environment.
SABC sued over a bad clip of Ramaphosa. At the center of a lawsuit exceeding 12 million rand are the public statements made by a broadcaster soon after the incident that it had a strong prima facie evidence.
On other news, the Swag Group executives were caught on drone footage having a steamy session in their private jacuzzi. Lady Premier talk show host Asanda Ashley Tjokololo and Love Talk show host Thembelani Adira were bumping and grinding in the jacuzzi as seen in our drone footage. Let's talk to our reporter who is at the Power Duo Penthouse Studios in Houghton.
I want us to dig into love and courage. When it comes to love and relationships, we risk everything in order to attract the person who we want to spend the rest of our lives with. We get courage to be able to speak to the person, approach them, and do what we need to do in order to get to know this person better, and in a hope of spending the rest of our lives with that individual. Now, how do we take that same courage that we have when it comes to love and use it into business?
But the key to developing courage is certainly something that we have to consider, because often courage is understood as the absence of fear, and certainly not. It's the ability to manage and overcome fear, not its absence. The absence of fear is certainly something that we call recklessness, which is not necessarily best. When it comes to cultivating courage, it requires us to be willing to engage in constructive failure. And unfortunately, in our culture today, we treat failure as if it's some bad, awful thing that we have to avoid at all costs, which is, to a degree, a really unfortunate way of thinking about it. The reason being is because failure is not necessarily always representative of some kind of internal inadequacy or something going wrong. In order to be able to take a calculated risk, one has to do something quite key. One has to separate outcomes from inputs. And the reason we have to do this is because when it comes to outcomes versus inputs, we only control one of those things. We, as much as we try, don't control outcomes. We don't control the final end product of most things. We can't say, for example, whether the business will succeed, because there are so many variables involved in this process that we can't really decide it. And where our fear comes from is because we always try to force ourselves into a position where we can guarantee an outcome. And this always makes us feel terrible, so we always back off from something because we can't control it. What we can control, however, are our inputs. So once we have created a baseline sense of safety, in order to overcome that fear, we have to be willing to focus only on our inputs. Am I doing all of the things I'm supposed to make this as successful as I possibly can? Because if we're doing that and we're devoting our energy and our mindset to that, the likelihood of the outcome being achieved, of course, increases, but our mental well-being becomes possible to maintain then. Because now we actually are being courageous, is that I don't know if it's going to succeed, but I am investing myself in doing everything I possibly can to make sure that happens. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, when we become outcome focused, we actually stop paying attention to inputs. We stop paying attention to, am I doing the right things? Am I creating the right measures? Am I doing all of these things? instead of focusing on what we actually need to be doing in that moment. And we find that people who are much more focused on inputs tend to not only feel better in these situations because they feel a greater sense of control because you're dealing with what you can control rather than what you can't, but you also find that someone is also gaining something important. When we focus excessively on outcomes, we overlook one of the most important factors that comes with failure. Failure isn't supposed to be about achievement. Failure is supposed to be about growth. We learn more from our failures than we can from our successes in many instances. And if we stop looking at that part of failure, we overlook something crucial. Even when something doesn't succeed in terms of outcomes, your inputs, more likely than not, have taught you things that you did not know before. They've created lessons for you that you did not have before. And usually, these things come into play for later projects, later businesses, later successes. And of course, we see success grow as a result of this. If you focus on inputs and you focus on growth rather than purely on outcome, even though that's what you ultimately want to drive, if you place your mindset there, we find people create magnificent outcomes, not necessarily the first time, but much later on. And I think a huge advocate for that mindset is someone like Elon Musk. The first few times it's not going to work, but if you focus on the lessons learned, you not only feel that you can face every day, but you are more likely to create something great in the long term.
So what's your perspective or what's your goal regards to love and support for an entrepreneurship?
It's probably the most important ingredient to a human being thriving, whether that's in business or in life. Typically we look at psychological needs for a human being and we not only list them, but we kind of put them in a hierarchy, which ones tend to be more important. And when we look at kind of our 6 basic needs, typically we find that people need a sense of certainty and safety, a sense of variety or spontaneity in their lives, the ability to feel belonged or a feeling of belonging or connection, the ability to grow or develop themselves, as well as a sense of significance, and finally the ability to contribute or serve to other people. When we see these 6 needs, we see these in almost every culture around the world from birth to death, and these become really important. But it's important to consider that you can't necessarily meet certain needs unless other needs are already met. And probably our most valued need for all human beings to start out with is a sense of emotional safety. We have to feel in our lives that we're safe and that we can care for others and be cared for in times of distress. And of course, this is where support comes in. Business is typically focused on significance, on growth, and on contribution. We're trying to meaningfully impact the world in ways that enrich ourselves and our loved ones as well as other people. And in order to meet these higher order needs, we have to first feel safe. And the best means by which to feel safe is to be loved and supported by those around you, to know that in moments of distress, in times when things don't succeed, you can be okay. Other people can be there for you, to look out for you, to hold you up. Because if you feel you don't have that, it's very difficult to move into this mindset where you feel you need to grow and take risks. So loving and belonging and feeling like other people will support us is absolutely crucial to anyone being able to thrive within a business environment.
How do we overcome the trauma of not getting love and support from your loved ones and family members?
When we suffer these kinds of psychological wounds, not having that sense of love or support, this ultimately involves somebody else putting a cage around you, telling you what you can be and what you can't be. And when we have this sense of limitation, we're going to operate within that. So if I tell you you can't do certain things or you can't succeed in certain ways, and you truly believe me, you're going to limit what you're going to allow yourself to do and what you're going to allow yourself to engage in. You're also going to think that your world is defined a certain way. Now, there are ultimately 3 things that many argue we can control if we really look at it. And that's going to be our attitude, our decisions, and our behaviors. And this seems to be the psychological distinguisher between those of us who continue to feel traumatized and those of us who develop resilience, or in reference to your example, those who repeat the sins of their parents and those who find a way of transcending those difficulties to create something worthwhile. What sometimes is the difference between their brothers? It could be genetics, it could be certain circumstances, but the key difference for them will be mindset. We have so many instances of people who come out of trauma and make something incredible of their lives. You know, if just the offhand examples of, for instance, the Jay-Z's of the world, who come from humble beginnings but really make something incredible, something undreamt of for many people in difficult circumstances. And the difference for them is the attitude they adopt. When we're left in a position where we are not getting what we deserve, and I think it's fair to say anyone deserves loving, supportive parents, but not all of us are afforded this. When you are shortchanged, the thing we have to consider is, are you going to hold on to the hurt of the circumstance? Or are you going to adopt an attitude of, what can I learn from this to better what's going on for myself? What is the attitude that I'm going to adopt? Because when we adopt an attitude of hurt, we perpetuate trauma. When we adopt an attitude of forgiveness, we do something else. And forgiveness doesn't mean forget something. Forgiveness also doesn't mean say it's okay, because it's not okay. Forgiveness means one thing and one thing only. Stop letting something control your life. You then get to control your life. And you decide, despite what I've been through, I'm going to make something of it. You adopt a different attitude, and therefore you make different decisions. I won't be this. I want to be something different, because I even know what that kind of looks like. And this defines our behaviors. It's all about transcending something. So when we don't have that, the most meaningful thing we can do is to look at what's happened to somebody who's not giving us that, get a sense of that, and start making our decisions to be able to cultivate for ourselves. Because we don't necessarily choose our parents, we don't necessarily choose our environments, and we certainly don't choose our genetics. But we do choose what we're going to create in our lives to a certain degree. And if we engage in the right behaviors, we can find that love and support in areas other than that.
Makes sense.
So the things we don't receive in certain relationships can be cultivated by us saying, well, I'm going to adopt the attitude of I can do something different. And that usually means finding relationships that will give you that. So many children find this in extended family members, in friends, in teachers, and in other valued mentors. Because it is a very worthwhile thing to pursue. We have seen from so much psychological literature that there's really one thing that's truly necessary for a child to thrive, and that is one person who loves and supports them. If they have just that one person, whatever shape they're going to take, if you can help yourself find that, if you can continue to seek it out rather than feeling you don't get it, it can usually be very, very helpful.
So that traumatized me quite a lot.
So it
Growing up.
traumatizes the kids.
Well, it traumatized me.
Yeah.
I don't know the rest of the kids whether they admire it or not.
Okay.
But for me, it traumatized me to a point where I made a decision that I don't want this to continue from generation to generation. So I wanted to.
That's how you're gonna do me after all I've done for you, Thembelani. Sitting in the jacuzzi with yellow bone and